Hey friends, Rolf back with you here again today. Louisville ProActivist Report, down at my favorite place, Injustice Square, on this cold and kind of overcast day here. So it's election season, and we've got 9 days till everybody has to go to the polls. So I wanted to talk to a local candidate here who's running for District 6 Metro Council against David James, the big player there. So I'm here with Khristina Smith.
Hey.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so David James.
Yeah.
You're going right at the city council president here. So what made you want to take this on?
So basically, President James is my Metro Council person, and I spoke a couple years ago at a conference about human trafficking and sex worker rights, and he left his card, said that he wanted to have a conversation about how to help and so on and so forth. And I never heard anything back, and it may be just a breakdown in the communication, like technology or whatever. And so that's just one thing that kind of clicked in my brain. And I called, I emailed, and I guess it was January of this year that I called the election center on Ormsby, and I said, hey, what do you have to do to run for Metro Council? And they told me, and so I just kind of made a decision then that okay, well, I'm gonna go for it, and I'm gonna do it, and at least challenge. And I really respect President James. I know it's a hard job, and he's been in that position for 10 years, I think, almost 8 to 10 years. And so yeah, but I just knew also from doing harm reduction and a lot of the work that I've done that there were things that needed to be discussed, and that there were issues and cracks in the infrastructure that needed to be looked at. And I felt like I and other people that were doing this work were not being heard. And it just needs to be more than about this. And there's a lot of amazing people that are down here at the square and just around the city that some of us knew one another, maybe like as acquaintance, and like knew of one another's work. And now we're kind of down here at the epicenter doing it and trying to help and feed the houseless, and so on and so forth. So and so that was pretty much just what clicked in my brain and why I decided to run.
And so for those who aren't aware or sure, District 6, what all neighborhoods are in District 6?
So it is Old Louisville, it's the California neighborhoods, I think it's part of Russell, like U of L. So it's a pretty big district. Okay,
and so just kind of looking at the issues in District 6, what are some of the big things that, or some of the problems there? What are some of the things that people come and talk to you about?
So one of the things that you really can't deny is, and you see it driving around District 6, is how many businesses that have closed, see the eviction rate, you see the houseless rate. Now we have the situation, U of L having to go online more so, and so we don't have the students there, and that presence, which is going to affect our local economy. So there's some really big issues that we need to address in District 6 and that we've needed to address. And like I said, it kind of goes back to what we were saying about, about what, where those cracks have been in the infrastructure. As far as what some of the people have talked to me about, I had a conversation with someone the other night that was talking about 45 calls to LMPD about a trap house and before a shooting. And so that's one of the concerns. There's a lot of concerns. There's a lot of concerns about, how do we jumpstart the economy and here, and then also about the fact that it's like there's just no jobs right now as it is, hardly in District 6 for if say there's all kinds of training programs and there's funding that's going in from the city, which like Code Louisville and so on and so forth, but at the same time a lot of the money has just been kind of funneled, kind of put out there, and but then there's no jobs. And I mean, with Code Louisville, ideally you'd be able to work remotely, but at the same time, like I said, that's just one of the concerns.
Okay, so let's get into your policies and what would happen if you got in office. Now, say you win, day one, what's your top priority?
So, top priority, that's a good one because it's all intersectional. It's kind of like what I've said before, is that if you have a job, then you also have to have access to food, and you're living in a food desert. So, and then the public transit system, if you don't have a car, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that it's like you have to take into consideration. Affordable housing, that's one of the issues, is that 2/3 of the district is renters. We used to have a tenants association. We don't have a tenants association any longer. So that's a big concern. So I would have to say that, the number one thing that we would have to really look at is housing, but also looking at food deserts and how are we going to get some groceries and, people that are going to, be able to like maybe start a grocery and be locally owned and to staff the local people and so on and so forth. So like I said, it's just kind of intersectional.
I like that you bring up the food deserts. So many people don't talk about that.
Yeah.
I did have a great guest on the other day. That was Jody Dahmer from Beargrass Thunder, who works in the city with alleyways to grow food in those alleys.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's the kind of thing I'd like to see the council working with people like that to grow, and basically create kind of like a food forest or a food alley, as I was calling it, I think. Something like that, and then co-op, farmer co-ops or, that kind of thing that we see around town, but just not enough of. So how do we make something like that happen?
So, food deserts. So basically, I know that at one time with some of the food co-ops that they were at least taking EBT. But with COVID, we haven't seen a lot of the gardens and so on and so forth as much as what we were. So I think that to get that started back up, it's just a matter of mutual aid and people coming together to work and do that as a community. So that's probably the first way to start. I mean, it's kind of like there's this misnomer that about the protesters, but they kind of did their own little garden, which is kind of nice. I mean, it's just like, and so all the vegetables and so on and so forth from that went to the West End once it was ready to be picked. So it's kind of cool. So I mean, like I said, coming from like that harm reduction background, mutual aid, yeah, there's a lot to be said about being able to work together to start this and to keep it going.
Nice. So let's kind of pivot a little bit and talk about livable wages.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about wages in the city, and how can we get the livable wages here?
Whoa. That's what I think of, like, the livable wages right now here. Like, it's so bad, so bad. Like, this is the thing, is that I know this for a fact that, a big chunk of the businesses go through, like, especially, like, not necessarily in our district, but just like around the city, they go through temporary agencies. And if there is a livable wage, the hours are usually less than 20 hours a week. So you might be getting paid $16, $17 an hour, but you're only getting, like, maybe if you're lucky, 20 hours a week. So, but most of them are like, you're getting paid like $11 an hour, $10 an hour. But I think like 11 or 12 bucks an hour is like pretty much the average wage. And so, just across the board, we've got to, like, I know it's going to be a strain on, like, some small business owners and so on and so forth, but this is the thing, is that there's a mindset that, actually if you treat your employees better, they will have pride. They will have pride in what you're paying them and doing that job and so on and so forth. And it goes to what you're paying them, how you treat them, what benefits that you may offer them, and so on and so forth. And it also, the mindset of, they're not going to be as stressed about, like, oh, I've got to pay this bill. Oh, I can't feed my family. Oh, there's this, there's that, So that's part of the whole mindset. And plus, if you're paying into that, it actually stimulates the economy. It's full circle. So.
Okay, we're going to pivot again.
Okay.
Since we are here at the heart of the city, here at Injustice Square, and we actually first met on a march.
Yeah.
Here recently. So let's talk about, police accountability and the criminal justice system here from a city level, and give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is that the criminal justice system here, it's very frustrating because I feel like the only money that's been coming in here for like a little bit, like since the protests started, because everybody has complained about how many boards have been up and this and that and blah blah blah, but there's like a vicious cycle where it's like the criminal justice system is very, in order to get your criminal charges taken off, for you to be qualified for expungement, you have to pay so much money for your fines and even after you've gone to jail and so on and so forth, and maybe have served time. And so that's one of the issues, is that it's like, and I'm sorry I'm saying like, but I'm like thinking, but that's the thing, is that you're having to pay this money after and so it creates this vacuum of, like, the police have arrested, and I had no, like, charges or anything. I had no criminal background whatsoever. And right now I've been arrested twice. For first time for trying to render aid, because I'm an EMT, for trying to render aid to someone that I was witnessing them being brutalized. And so I was arrested. And then I was arrested again just for walking on Market Street after curfew. And it's just like, so the bail projects have to raise money and bail us out. So it's advantageous for LMPD to keep arresting us because that's money for them and it keeps the wheel going. So that's kind of how the criminal justice system has been set up across the board. And not just for like the situations with the protesters, but just in general. And I was eating somewhere the other day, and I knew that Bashir had signed where if you're a felon you got your voting rights back. And I was talking to someone that was their situation, was that they could not get their voting rights back because they had not paid all the money that they owed from their charges. And and even if you're going through probation and so on and so forth, and there were people that I worked with at like some jobs that were, like I was saying, we worked through temporary agencies and so on and so forth, because I like doing physical jobs like that. I like to move. But that was like part of the stress, was that you would have single mothers that were, really stressed out that they couldn't get their charges cleared. They couldn't get anything expunged because they still owed this money to the state, and they're working for like $11 or $12 an hour. Which, like I said, goes back to what the last question of, that's not a livable wage at all. So, so that's the thing, is that it's like with this justice system right now, it creates a barrier. Because like, for me, I've done sex worker rights and being co-chair for Louisville Metro Human Trafficking Task Force, and now with the state task force. That's part of the barrier, is that when you arrest people, and it's also a systemic situation where you have a police force that may be largely white, that may be arresting people of color, and then they're having to work, the communities are having to work at a lesser wage because they're people of color, and then they're having to pay restitution when they're racially profiled and targeted. Then these are the issues, and it creates barriers where it's like you have white people that may say, oh, well, talking about crime and so on and so forth, but at the same time, and talking about like communities not having jobs, the reason they also don't have jobs is that there's background checks, and then if they're a felon or they're not a felon, like basically there's barriers because they can't get a job, or they can't get certain jobs even if they're qualified, like even if they're a degree professional, because of pending charges, and so on and so forth. So
okay, what would you like to see in the area of police accountability? Any changes or anything?
Well, let me take a drink. There's a lot that I would like to see. It's one thing I'd like to see as far as police accountability is, I think there definitely needs to be a better check and balance on if you're having mental issues and you're in law enforcement or whatever, or even if you're a first responder. Because like I said, for me, I'm a first responder. And hurt people. And if you cannot do the job and without hurting people, quit your job. That's basically what I think, that it's like you have to have a good base yourself. And I feel like, and I know that there's reasons that we all go into these professions to help people, and because you want to create positive change in the community. But there's also, one of the interim chiefs said that from here on out, there's going to be accountability, that if an officer sees another officer using excessive force or doing something out of line, then they're supposed to say something. And the first night that I was arrested, seeing a female person of color having her head bashed into the concrete, I didn't see anybody stepping forward, any other officers stepping forward and saying, hey, that's too much.
Was that on 2nd Street Bridge, by the way?
That was 2nd and Broadway, yeah, at McDonald's.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's also the other thing to think about too, is the fact that if a chief says that, that's basically admitting, and this is what I thought whenever I first heard it, was that they're basically admitting that wasn't the protocol before that. So basically they were saying that it's like, that was okay behavior beforehand, just to like turn your head and not notice that. That was the first thing that rung out to me whenever I heard that. So it's nice that they recognize that now, but I still I call BS on it. I don't think that's how it's gonna roll. And I mean, and seeing the fact that Attica Scott and other people that were just walking to a church before a curfew were arrested, that says that, how many officers knew that was wrong. So it really stinks. But I mean, I think one of the positives was I spoke at Metro Council this week about my experience, and also about some of the concerns about the pay raise with the FOP contract. And so I think it was a positive that Metro Council passed an ordinance about the excessive force. So that's one step in the right direction. But individuals have to step up and hold themselves and one another accountable at the end of the day. It goes into some of the work with trafficking and policing behavior and power, and when we are basically trying to derive power from someone else's experience and from another person, and to control that person. It goes back to that. We have to realize that we probably all have vicarious trauma or trauma from our own childhood that we need to check on. And I feel like that there's some first responders that they get into this for the, I'm not going to say the wrong reasons, the right reasons. They have the reasons, but they need to be healthy too.
So what's your stance on cannabis legalization in the city, both recreationally and medicinally?
So I know Portland and Seattle, it's helped immensely with their economy, and so I feel like that is something that should be looked at and especially medicinal, because and that's also been one of the issues with the justice system, the criminal justice system. So yeah, I feel like that maybe, like I said, looking at Seattle, looking at Portland, Oregon, and some other cities, it should be something that's at least considered.
And I want to go back to something you said earlier too, because I know a big thing for you is the topic of sex work and human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about those, like how much of that do you think we have in the city, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, so I think that it's pretty prevalent. I feel like I know it's pretty prevalent across most cities. The city has a long history of, we have an escort license that was around, it's still around. It was pretty prevalent back in more so in like the 90s and early 2000s, and where you paid for a license and so on and so forth, and you paid so much, you paid like depending on the phone line and so on and so forth for an escort agency, and that escort agency basically went through a background check and then also paid a fee, and then they were able to employ people. But the drawback to that was that when they were employed, they were employed as independent contractors, which meant that they got no workers' comp, they got no Social Security paid in, but they still had to pay, and they also had to pay their employer out of the money that they would bring home and so on and so forth. And it was also a situation of debt bondage, and that's one of the things that you see in sex work, is that debt bondage and independent contractors, like in dancing and so on and so forth too. So if you're paying your income taxes, your federal, state, and local taxes, then you should have labor rights, you should have human rights, and you should have civil rights. And that's one of the things that was not happening with that. And so that's one of the concerns, is that created a trafficking situation. My background, I do identify as a trafficking survivor, and for one night I had to pay my employer $800 to take the night off. There were people of color that I worked with that would have to get 2 white people to cover one night for them to take the night off. So this is some of the things that was actually happening, and and we paid the city lots of money to do that job, but it was actually trafficking. So there's this idea that the Kentucky Derby is like the hot time of the year for trafficking, but it's actually every day of the year. There's the houseless community that may be at risk for labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is another situation that doesn't get a lot of press because it's very sensationalized. Everybody likes to focus on sex trafficking. So that was the thing, is that but labor trafficking, and with COVID, it's been very prevalent that people are being taken advantage of, foreign nationals and so on and so forth. You see it in construction, you see it in taxis, you see it pretty prevalently. And like I said, a lot of people don't realize that that's what it is, because there's that Liam Neeson type scenario that's out there. that's been kind of perpetuated, but there's different levels to it.
I know you say you've done some work with that in the past, so kind of tell people about like some of your activism past, some of the things you've worked on over the years.
Yeah, so Sex Workers Outreach Project Kentucky, I started a chapter about 7 years ago when I knew that there was a need. And so I started that, and we basically believe in human rights. This is a human rights issue, and like I said, the sex worker narrative kind of gets pushed aside because at the end of the day with trafficking, each individual should have autonomy, should have their own individual autonomy and a say over their own person. And so when they're called a victim, because we have in society, it's looked down upon to be a victim in a sense. So we're kind of taught that it's like, no. And so whether that person thinks they're a victim, whether they don't think they're a victim, whether they really are a person, wherever they are in need along that spectrum, I as another person do not get to make that judgment call. And that's one of the things that we kind of talk about with like service providers and law enforcement and social service agencies and so on and so forth, that to be careful of that and to let each individual have their own personal narrative and to work through it, because that's where empowerment is. Substance abuse and other issues are based in shame. So when we are passing judgment and creating this cycle of shame, then that is what is going to create more barriers for people to be able to go along on their journey in a healthy manner. Because, and that was the other thing too, is that it's like the language and linguistics of this colonialized terminology of healthy and normal and this and that, and we need to realize that my experience may not be like your experience, and so on and so forth. To be respectful of pronouns with the LGBTQI plus community, and that's part of it. Trying to get resources and housing for the community, that's part of the work that we do with SWAP, and with the task force and so on and so forth. While there's a lot of different layers to it, from adult to all the way down to keeping kiddos safe and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the direction. That's kind of what we do. Trying to do like safe sex kits out in the community, trying to do hepatitis and HIV testing, trying to do like conferences to talk about de-escalation techniques and things that I may have learned on the ambulance, and also from being a trafficking survivor that talks about sex worker rights and identifies as former sex worker and so on and so forth. Just trying to basically, like I said, teach about checking ourselves, in order to keep other people happy and healthy too.
Okay, so we talked about a lot of things so far. Is there anything that you want to address that we haven't talked about yet?
I can't think of anything.
Well, if you want to, just let people know, why they should vote for you and how to find you online.
Yeah, so I am, my Facebook, we have a Facebook page, which is Khristina Smith, and it's with a KH. I'm on the ballot as Christy, Krsti Smith, and with the Khristina, it's Kristina on the ballot. But the website, or not the website, but the actual Facebook is spelled with a KH. So it's Khristina Smith from Metro Council District 6, and if you put that in there, you should be able to, it should pop up. I know it's like down here at the very, very end. Like, we're getting close to November 3rd, super close.
9 more days.
Yeah, it's super close. And, you know, I appreciate your vote. You know, a lot of the things, like I said, that I did want to touch on and tackle was, and just at least bring to that table was basically, you know, like the affordable housing and, like, you know, some options for the houseless community, and like maybe doing tiny house communities and where we have like the gardens and so on and so forth. That's kind of like what my thinking was, and how to like stimulate. And because before June 27th, that was kind of what we had here. It was like this cool little harm reduction community of like all the different tents, and for the first time you had, you know, first aid that was free for the houseless that were down here. And that was one of the barriers too, is that if they've had a situation where they've been, you know, stigmatized and treated pretty poorly during by a healthcare team, then they didn't have to worry about that. They trusted us, and they, you know, we in turn knew who they were, and so on and so forth. So it was a really good, you know, situation all the way around. All the food was free, and like I said, going back to like what we were talking about the community garden and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, just, you know, and then also we had the therapists that were down here for protester wellness. And, you know, if we had like little communities like that, and it wouldn't even really take that much money. I think it would take a lot less than what people give it credit for, because, like, you know, SWAP, it's been like 7 years, and we get no money because I talk about sex worker rights, you know. So, but that is the thing, is that you know, when the money goes down to the ground, to the grassroots level, and you're not necessarily having big CEOs that are making $300,000 a year, and where's that money? And we have the houseless situation bursting at the seams here in the city. People need to think about that. You need to think about, like, you know, instead of maybe, I mean, I hate to be that person that's going to be like, oh, don't give to this charity or that charity, but, you know, if you roll up your window and you're not giving something to people at the end of an off-ramp, and you know that they live in a campsite somewhere, but you're going to give like $50 to a 501c3 that's paying $300,000 to a CEO, and especially if they shut down during COVID, I think that should be thought about. That's all I got. And yeah, those are just some things that you can think about if you want to vote for me, like I said, because I'm the person that's going to say those things, and I'm okay with that.
Nice.
Thanks.
I very much appreciate that you tackle subjects that most people don't want to tackle. You know, from sex work to human trafficking and stuff. These are just not things you hear on campaign trails. So,
yeah.
You know, it's much appreciated that you bring light to that, and we need that voice.
Thank you.
So best of luck to you in your race against David James here in 9 days. So Khristina Smith for District 6, everyone. So check her out online, and you know, if you're here, while you're here, click like, follow, subscribe, wherever you're watching this at. Comment on the post. That helps boost the algorithms. I'm local, independent, and nonprofit, so the only way you can help me out is by helping boost these videos and getting them out to people. So pass this along to anybody you know that's going to vote in District 6. I appreciate all y'all for watching. Until next time, and remember, always think critically.
Thanks.